Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. We are live in Tennessee, Nashville, Music City for the National Newspaper Publishers Association's annual summer conference and kicked off really well last night at the African American Music Museum, African American Music History Museum. Nice party, a chairman's reception. The activities continue throughout the week here in Nashville. This morning, we are discussing Yusef Salaam, a member of the Exonerated Five, has won his primary election to the New York City Council. Huge election victory for Yusef Salaam. We'll bring you details on that as well. Also, Ron DeSantis says if he's elected president, there are four federal agencies he is going to get rid of, including the IRS. We'll talk about that as well. And a great column, op-ed this morning in the Griot. Michael Harriot wrote about the new African American History Museum in South Carolina, which he calls South Carolina the capital, the U.S. capital for African Americans. Of course, 90%. Barack and Michelle Obama was there and said 90% of African Americans came through South Carolina in the slave trade. But we'll also tell you why Michael Harriot is saying, if you want to visit this museum, perhaps now is the time, because it may not be there too much longer, and it just opened. First, we're going to talk about Yusef Salaam. We're expecting a guest this morning, but otherwise, you just got me. But Yusef Salaam, member of the Exonerated Five, has won election to City Council in New York. What a turnaround. What a story that is. As we all know, years ago, 1989, these five young African American teens went to Central Park just to have a good time, like many others. Then they got falsely accused of something, and they have spent the bulk of their lives fighting to have their names cleared. And they finally was cleared, despite a lot of opposition from powerful people, including former President Donald Trump, who took out, if you recall, full-page ads calling for the death penalty for these young men, teenagers at the time. It's using every I don't want to say racist trope in the book, but he certainly sounded the dog whistle in trying to get these guys convicted, which they were falsely convicted, but also he wanted death for them. And he wasn't the only one. But Yusef Salaam has turned it totally around. Of course, the Exonerated Five went on to have a major settlement of over $40 million with the city of New York and have their names cleared. Now, Yusef Salaam will sit on the city council in New York. He won the primary. There currently is no opposition from Republicans for the general election. So it is likely, more than likely, probable, I should say, that he's going to be sitting on the city council come next term. Be interesting to see the policies that he institutes. It'll be interesting to see how other council members work with Yusef Salaam. We'll be following that. And if our esteemed guests arise, we will discuss that further. Wanted to talk also about Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis has come out and said if he is elected president, he's going to do away with four departments, federal departments. The first one being, and you probably guessed it, the Department of Education. Of course, DeSantis has been leading the charge on this crusade against learning real American history. And to take education away is really amazing. Now, the former administration, we know that the education secretary admittedly so, had very little interest in education, but she was the head of the Department of Education from 2016 to 2020. And now Ron DeSantis is saying he wants to get rid of altogether the Department of Education. Really, really interesting stuff. But in addition to the Department of Education, it's the IRS, the Commerce Department. Now, the IRS is interesting too, because we know that, again, Republicans uh, are very much against taxing a certain portion of America, particularly the wealthy. They fought to keep taxes in check for the wealthy. Their policies, and this is not conjecture, but their policies has always been to tax those who are less fortunate, to put the highest tax burden on them. They feel like they have expressed, they feel like folks who have quote unquote made it, well, they worked hard to get there and they shouldn't have to pay an extra tax. Really, really interesting politics. I'm looking at the comments. Ron DeSantis is the 21st George Wallace. Segregation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever, says Power 96. And he also mentions going back to Yusef Salaam. He's the same age as the exonerated five. That could have been me, he says, innocent and broke with poor legal representation. This is pretty much how they were back in 1989, right? Innocent, didn't have the means, had poor legal representation. But that is the way it has been. But Ron DeSantis wants to get rid of these departments in the U.S., the federal government, I should say. Really, really interesting stuff there. We will see. We'll see. What do we do without the Department of Education? What do we do without the IRS? The IRS, of course, the current administration is trying to pour more money into the IRS to get more agents to crack down on the wealthy and their, you hear that saying all the time, tax write-offs, things like that. So be interesting to see the platform of all of these candidates as the election unfolds. Obviously, there's at least a dozen folks running for president on the Republican side. And on the Democratic side, of course, you have the president, you have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and you have Marianne Williams. I think Marianne Williams, of course, is an independent, not a Democrat, if I'm correct, if I'm not mistaken, I should say. But you got a whole household full of candidates running for president on the Republican side. Chris Christie has come out with some harsh criticism of Donald Trump. You remember, Chris Christie was a big ally of the former president. Now, of course, he's an opponent in the Republican field, and he's one of those who is going after Trump. Trump, of course, and DeSantis have their beef, if you will, and we'll see how that shakes out. Those are the presumed front runners for the Republican nomination, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. So we will see. Interesting op-ed in the Grio this morning. Really good. It's a lot of words. I think Michael Harriot wrote at least 3,000 words on this op-ed, but it's about the International African American Museum that just opened in South Carolina this week. Barack and Michelle Obama helped to christen the museum, as they did with the African American Museum, Smithsonian's African American Museum in Washington, D.C. They mentioned that it was the U.S. capital for Black America, if you will, because of the fact that, in their words, 90% of African Americans came through South Carolina because of the slave trade. But here, Michael Harriot is making a case that you should see it before it's no longer there. And so here he writes, and I'm going to quote him from his article. Michael Harriot writes that the International African American Museum comes into existence at a time when people across the country and the Palmetto State, which is South Carolina, for those who don't know, in particular have chosen to live simultaneously as liars and fools. While Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has built his brand around eliminating wokeness, quote unquote wokeness, South Carolina's Don't Say Gay law is 35 years old. South Carolina legislators introduced an anti-critical race theory bill 7 months before Florida lawmakers filed theirs. For 5 years, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who's now running for president, dismissed calls to stop flying the Confederate flag at the Capitol. It took a racist massacre to make her change her mind, he writes. Now that she's running for president, Nikki Haley has called on governors to ban, quote unquote, uncomfortable parts of Black history because it tells white kids they are bad and makes victims out of Black children. Her fellow South Carolinian presidential contender, Senator Tim Scott, once told me, Michael Harriot is saying, once told him that he doesn't think systemic racism exists. Scott says that we shouldn't be educating kids on systemic racism. He says doing so is a dangerous, offensive, disgusting message to send to our young people today. Harriet says that Scott will probably be offended by the museum exhibit that shows how Black freedmen built and funded their own schools because of a racist system that stole Black taxpayers' wealth for the use of whites-only schools. And Nikki Haley may ultimately ban the museum's Black majority exhibit. And he mentions too, the interesting about Tim Scott, we all know Tim Scott is Black, but what's even more interesting, Tim Scott hails from North Charleston, South Carolina. And Charleston is where the majority of folks came through in the transatlantic slave trade. Really, really interesting stuff. We've lifted up some of the writings in the griot in this program before. I would certainly encourage reading Michael Harriot's op-ed. It really goes into some personal things and also what went on during the celebration. He mentioned that while the celebration of opening the museum was happening, many folks were not allowed to that celebration. So they went to a local restaurant to celebrate real Black history, is how Michael Harriot puts it. Timothy Williams says, I love some Michael Harriot. And David Youngblood says he loves Michael Harriot's writing. Power 96, of course, has a nickname for Tim Scott from the Cosby Kids character. But that's really the headlines. But we are here in Nashville, Tennessee. Again, the National Newspaper Publishers Association celebrating 196 years of the Black Press of America here in Nashville for the annual convention. Last night at the African American Music Museum. Of course, it is Black Music Appreciation Month throughout the month of June. People have been honoring Black music. There was also an exhibit that we saw last night about the 50th anniversary of hip hop, which has also been this year synonymous with Black Music Appreciation Month because it is the 50th anniversary of hip hop. They have so many plans going on throughout the year.
Yes, you were.
For hip hop.
You were there.
And we got to see some great exhibits last night that featured the greats like Run DMC, Ice-T. There was a wonderful, wonderful exhibit about Ice-T. If you're a West Coast rap fan or even an Law and Order SUV fan, there was a Ice-T exhibit, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. And they really did a great job at this museum. Nice atmosphere. There was music, drinks, and everything else, food, and a good time by the Black press and their publishers at the Black Music Museum. Across the street, while that was going on, ironically, a huge crowd outside as well as inside for the Black Press event. But outside, the NHL draft was going on live outside here on the streets of Nashville, Tennessee. Had a big stage set up, streets were blocked off. Really, really quite the scene last night. We went to Shake Shack actually as well down there. So really, everything is like big. They say everything is big in Texas. Well, everything down there in downtown Nashville. If you haven't been to the city, beautiful city. Rosetta Perry, who is the publisher of the Tennessee Tribune, one of our member papers, fantastic job. You could see she's got everything organized and ready as the host publisher of the conference. So we're having a good time, folks. Having a good time. Join us as we bring you some more great stuff throughout the day and later today as well as we head into the Merit Awards for tonight. But that's all we got for you right now. We missed our guest, but that's all we have. We'll see you a little bit later. Thanks for joining us.